If I ever needed proof that hell was real, I think I found my answer. It is, and I've stuck it out for 18 years. Let me tell you that it's been nothing but a world of misery. Life is just some sick little game, and I want out. All I can do is just sit here and think about how I got to this point until the time comes. Sitting out on this hill on this absolutely freezing night will be worth it in the long run. Or maybe not. It doesn't matter. I just have something to get off my chest. Just sitting out here, I think back to where my disdain for life began. I can remember it vividly. I was 4 years old, sitting in my tiny, junky little rat hole of a house. My mother worked 3 slightly above minimum wage jobs to tide us over. My pathetic excuse for a father sat on his chair shoveling meat into his slop hole. It's sad when you think about it. A strained, hard-working woman busting her ass serving ungrateful bastards at a bar, trying to support us just to funnel filth into my father's gaping mouth. He had the mind of a toddler and the body of a decrepit old man. Not to mention, he looked much like a slug. He probably had some sort of personality disorder, but what did a 4-year-old know? It was always hard to call him my dad. This one particular moment was striking to me in the fact that it was nothing special at all. I was sitting in the middle of the floor staring up at the wall. That was as exciting as my life got in those times. Fat Ass was watching TV again, screaming at some soap opera, as if the events were happening in real life. In his hand was a sloppy Joe that surprisingly made it everywhere but his mouth. Down the front of his shirt, all over the floor, and finally, in one swift motion, all down my back. Imagine sitting on the floor, minding your own business, and suddenly feel the texture of lukewarm chunks of meat sliding down the back of your shirt. It was that moment when I decided that I hated life. I hated every single minute of it. I had never explicitly thought of it before, but it was that particular moment, with remains of a cow carcass on my back, that I had actually addressed it. Not bad for a 4-year-old. I was furious, but I didn't do anything. I just listened to the bald, pink, hairy animal holler at the TV while throwing ground-up remains of lips and asshole. My mother came back around this time. She bitched me out for getting meat all over my back and ruining my new shirt. She was a stupid woman. Blames the kid for getting meat in a hard-to-reach area, but not the blubbering fool holding the sandwich. She had bags under her eyes and a giant wart growing out of the side of her face. Throughout my whole life, and somewhat to this day, I believed she was the Wicked Witch of the West. Her hair wispy and like that of a dehydrated corpse. I let her chew me out and spit me out like she did while sending a wad of saliva into my face. My father was enraged, not because of some bitch spit in my face, but because she interrupted his show. The two bickered over something completely stupid while I went back to staring at the wall. I held strong. I didn't cry as a child. Each and every time I did, I would stop and realize that there was no point, as I would just be left to blubber while my parents had ugly coitus in the next room. Now, I wouldn't say they were abusive necessarily. More like really dumb people. I was ashamed to even be seen with them. One time in school, I had been inducted into the school's honor society. My parents attended the ceremony against my wishes, and boy, it was a mess. They acted like I was the next Einstein or something, and that it was thanks to their genetics. My father would even point at his groin to people telling them to thank the unthinkable. Every teacher that they talked to, they would just brag. Yeah, that's my daughter all right. She's always been so independent. Or, the best part, she's learned everything she knows by herself. Probably because I didn't have anyone to teach me anything, since Mom was wiping up puke at work, and Dad was stuffing himself with anything that had a pulse. If anything, the whole Honor Society incident reinforced exactly what I felt was wrong with my life. I couldn't bring those people anywhere. If I had to pick something else out of my life, it would be my dating life. I never did date anyone. It's not that I didn't want to, it's just that I couldn't form a connection with the people around me. This one time, the neighbor boy asked me out, and I told him that I would rather lick the floor of a Chipotle bathroom after a norovirus outbreak than to spend 1 minute with him. That was probably one of my best memories. I remember having to put a restraining order on him when I went into my room to discover him leaping out the window with a pair of my underwear. The guy was a creep. He eventually got arrested for fondling up someone. He used to text me all the time about dating, and all I remember about that time period is how many times I would think of some clever way to insult him. He didn't really like me, he just wanted inside my pants. This freak especially was the reason why I didn't want to have any intimate contact with anyone. People just reminded me of him, and I figured that I would be better off alone. I couldn't imagine smacking my tongue into someone else's mouth and finding some enjoyment out of it. But, at the same time, it would have been nice to have someone there for me. My mom and dad were two of the worst people I've encountered, but they were made for each other. I never had that. I just had myself, and you can guess how that is. I never had friends either. Sure, I talked with people for a bit, but that was it. I never hung out with anyone or got their phone number either. I was pretty neutral to everyone. Bullying was never a problem either. Sure, an occasional insult came flying my way, but I would simply turn it back on the dumbass who spewed shit from their lips. I was too weird to be friends with, but not weird enough to be picked on. I just existed in the shadows. Things have been lonely my whole life, which may partially explain why I'm at where I'm at now. I've only had myself to rely on, and even that's not quite enough sometimes. I began to ponder the bad things that happened in my life. Now, I hadn't been through anything too traumatic, but just the little things. When I was in elementary school, I remember coming home from school to see my guinea pig. He was the only thing I felt that I could trust. I walked in on the worst possible sight imaginable for an 8-year-old girl. Underneath the extraordinarily enormous ass of my father was the squished remains of my pet. He must have gotten loose somehow, and the beady-eyed wildebeest sat on top of him. I screamed and ran hopelessly to see if there were any chance to save him. The greedy man blubbered a little bit, the fat infused into his vocal cords, impeding his speech, to ask something that meant little to me. It was hopeless. Whatever good in my life was taken away. I never had many pets before. We had a dog once, but that thing got out of there fast. She booked it out the door the minute we brought her home and never seen her since. We had some goldfish too. One by one they slowly disappeared. Sometimes it was my drunk father pissing in the tank, or my drunk father feeling in the mood for fried fish. You would think that with my dad's alcohol problem that it would have negatively affected me. It didn't. I found it quite enjoyable, actually. He didn't do much when he was drunk, at least anything that wasn't within rolling distance. But there was one time where things turned ugly as he is. My grandma had always felt bad for me and even offered me to live with her, but my parents protested that. She was generous to donate some of her time and money to help me build up my bedroom. Yep, turning that dinky joint into a place I could enjoy being in. I remember we spent hours at the store picking out stuff for the room. Posters, throw rugs and pillows, various lamps, etc. We even found an adorable-looking love seat to stick in there. She also bought some paint so we could change the piss-yellow walls to a more soothing, gentle pink. We spent easily an entire weekend putting my room together. Finally, after all the work was done, I could now have my own space. That, however, didn't last long. I spent all my time in there for the first few days. When I was at school, all I thought about was going back in there. One day, literally 3 days after we finished the room, I was greeted by another gruesome sight. My father, undulating on the floor of my beautifully renovated room, passed out in a pile of his own fluids. Apparently that day he had gotten so drunk that he nearly had given himself alcohol poisoning and stumbled into my room. Every sort of fluid imaginable was in there, all over the walls, all over the furniture, the floor, everything. We ended up throwing away just about everything we had purchased and replaced with shittier versions laying in the attic. My pink walls now had splashes of piss-yellow paint covering up the soiled patches. My floor was ripped out completely into concrete. My bed needed to be thrown out and was replaced by my parents' old bed. All I could think of, sleeping on that damn thing, was how I was probably conceived there. That's why people drink, is the only thought that went through my head. However, I always avoided drinking because I knew it could get bad. I could vividly picture my future self passed out in a ditch, waiting for some greasy slugger to scoop me out. That's not a pleasant thought. People always want to know why I am the way I am, so unhappy. They want to know why I don't have friends or dates. The truth is, I hate society. I hate liars, cheaters, narcissists, and imposters. 98% of the population. A person works for their own gain. Every action they do is motivated by selfish desire. Sometimes boldly, like scamming some grandma through email, making her think she won a cruise to the Caribbean as long as she enters a credit card number. Sometimes subtle, like someone who carries this philanthropist persona about him, donating down to his ass sweat to charities when he really just wants to be recognized for what a good boy he is. You have those people, the imposters. Then comes the liars. The person who tells you how great they are and how successful and happy they are, when really they want to either get in your pants or believe that their own little self-fantasy is somewhat real. You see right through these people early on. Then there are the narcissists, the people bragging about how wonderful they are, when actually they aren't competent to wipe their own ass. What's worst is the fakers, though. I can't even begin how many times I thought I met the nicest person ever who turned out to either be a loony or a level 3 sex offender. Seriously, I met a guy who I thought was the sweetest person ever and thought was someone that actually built faith in humanity for me. We became somewhat of friends and probably hinted at romance. Little did I know, while we were going on trips to the movies or walks in the park, that there were children trafficked in his basement. It was when I read the news article of his arrest that I knew the human race was fucked. We don't care about anyone or anything but ourselves, and will fake ourselves to other people. We're willing to tear each other limb from limb if that's what it takes to survive. I can't trust anyone, and no one can trust me. I never believed in fighting. What was the point of getting angry to the point of smashing your limbs against another human being in order to inflict pain upon them because they called you a name? What would extraterrestrial beings think if they saw people foolishly throwing hands at each other's faces because of feelings? Same goes with homicide. People get so angry with another person that they have to go through the effort of making that person cease to exist. I get it. I sometimes feel the urge to shove some scallywag down the stairs, but I stop myself. We're only alive for about 78 years on average. Nothing we do matters. The human race will wipe itself out through global warming, and the world will reset itself before being consumed by the behemoth known as the sun. This revelation puts me at a crossroad. I could either put an end to all this by plunging into the unknown, or I could live out the rest of my days doing whatever I want without a care, as I'll eventually cease to exist. I figure in such a short amount of time that I have, that I might as well let other people live out their miserable days, and myself for that matter. My darkest moment was when I saw my slobbering father passed out drunk in his chair. I had never considered homicide before, but I was in such a dark place and fed up with everything, I was going to smother the flame right out of him. I remember looking at those disgusting wiry glasses and that bald head peppered with moles that created ugly constellations on top of his head. I eerily approached him with a pillow in hand, getting ready to actually murder someone. I stopped, though. In front was a giant wall-hanging mirror, something that looked like something out of a deceased grandmother's hideous basement. I saw myself, my father, and the future murder weapon. I felt something at that moment. I couldn't bear to do it. Before then, the future didn't matter. The thought of prison, or any sort of consequence for that matter, wasn't there in that moment up until I looked in the mirror. I looked at my slug man of a father. He was like a small puppy, sleeping in his ignorant bliss. I saw someone who didn't have much reason to exist, or really a purpose at all, for that matter. He was a big child that never quite reached adulthood, despite looking the part. The feelings inside of me subsided, and I instead stroked his head. Tears welling up in my eyes, thinking about what could have happened. He was lost in dreamland, slowly slapping his lips as he chowed down on an imaginary cheeseburger inside his own head. I bawled at this point. This man, despite everything I've been through, just wanted to live, and I was going to take it away from him. It was from this moment that I would treat him like a puppy. He wasn't, and still isn't, human to me, but I can say that at the very least, he deserved his life. When looking at that mirror, I saw the problem. It wasn't him, it was myself. I was the boogeyman that I set out to smother, not fat ass. Life has gotten me down. Thinking back to school and the bitches that I encountered there makes me want to go into outer space even more. There was this one girl named Caitlin. She was as pretentious as anyone could be. Luckily, she never made it anywhere. Caitlin had it all. Money, looks, friends, the whole shebang. You could call her popular, but I never understood that term. She's popular at a nobody school in a nobody town. She liked to tell me how I was nothing and how I'd amount to little. Little did she know that 2 years later she'd be knocked up with some toothless crackhead while becoming one herself in the process. Life has its way of getting revenge to people who deserve it. The first time she told me I was the scum of the earth, I fired back at her to shut the fuck up, you miserable bitch. That was a fine moment. Of course, the vice principal with the Titanic-sized nose overheard that, calling my dumb parents and everything. My disgusting mother picked me up that day, screaming at me the whole time. So I did what any logical thinking person would do. I unbuckled my seatbelt and bailed out that damn car. The look on my mother's face when I swung that door open makes me smile to this day. I bailed all right. Tumbled and rolled across that pavement while the car screeched to a stop. Unfortunately, that didn't kill me. I was scraped up all right, but nothing was broken. My mother, shrieking even more now, tried to get me back in the car. I refused and ran away. I didn't go home. I went to Caitlin's house. She had just gotten home, just as I had shown up. She didn't recognize me at first until I yelled out at her and proudly displayed my mutilated meat suit. She flipped out, of course, especially when I told her that it was all her fault and she made me do it. Those were some real balls right there, if you ask me. Were there any positives in my life? Maybe. For a little while, I believed people cared about me, and I had what you'd call friends. One by one, they'd slowly disappear from my life. I was never anyone's first choice. Even my bestest friends would pick someone over me. I remember once, I had a friend whom I'd been with since elementary school. I'd hang out with her all the time. We'd cause all sorts of trouble and spend all our free time with one another. Of course, we had our little clique that I also considered my friends, but we never hung out outside of the group. If my best friend Jan wasn't there, then I'd be alone. I thought I could trust Jan. I really tried to. One day in high school, however, she met someone. I was walking with her to class as usual, and we were going on about something meaningless when this girl came up to us. She liked Jan's shirt and gave her a compliment. Next thing I knew, I was right in the middle of a three-way conversation. Apparently, they were somewhat acquaintances and had a few classes together. I thought this girl was nice, so naturally I tried to chime in and get my opinion heard. Should have just got up and left right there. Every single time I opened my mouth, I could get out 2 words before one of those two talked over me. Even better if when I did say something, it was met with total silence. I didn't like this girl anymore. She told Jan that they should hang out more. Of course, I wasn't included. Stupid 14-year-old me chimes in, I'd be down for that. That tone changed quickly. You could tell that this girl wouldn't care if I just dropped off the face of the earth. To add icing to the cake, that was the last time I hung out with Jan. This wench that she barely knew became a closer friend within a week than I was in 7 years. Now Jan and I are at that stage where we don't even wave to each other when passing one another. Those other people I hung out with are in the same boat. I've always been that person that people naturally dislike, even been told that. But don't worry, I've never let people bully me. They say one word and I immediately throw it back in their face. So, here I am. I'm completely alone in this world, and I've accomplished nothing. At this point, life is not even worth living. Yes, no one cares about my pathetic life, so why am I even writing this letter? The answer? It's a big fuck you to everything. I've never been your typical bubble-headed bimbo that everyone wants. People have told me that I need to change my ways to lead a happier life. Maybe they're right, but do I want to live up to their standards? No. I'm everything that society doesn't want. If someone tells me to jump, I'm supposed to ask how high, when really I'd instruct the other person to leap into a lake and drown. No one wants that. No one wants me. I'm nobody's favorite. That's why I'm sitting out in the middle of nowhere writing my life story. So take this as my farewell to this life. No, I'm not going to end it. But I figure things can't get any worse than they are now. I only have about 6 more decades before I kick, so I might as well do something with it. I've already got my plane ticket. Tomorrow I'm flying out far away from here and starting anew. Looks like those crusty jobs I've done throughout those teen years finally paid off. So, in a way, this is a suicide letter to the old me. I'm just a dumbass Roomba vacuum sent to roam this earth, but so be it. I just have to embrace it.